This is Winning IR, a podcast exploring the diverse insights within the IR community. Join me, Mark Fasken, as I sit down with IROs and other IR stakeholders to discuss the winning strategies, tactics, and shifts in thinking that are redefining the profession. The IR function is both an art and a science, merging finance, regulation, marketing, and communications. So how do you create a program that gives you the best of all worlds? Today's guest has a history of being a trailblazer in IR and was one of the first women in Brazil to talk about investments on social media. Fabiane Goldstein, Investor Relations Senior Director at Grayling, brings 20 years of experience in financial markets and is an expert in investor relations, corporate communications, sustainability and ESG, and the power of social media in the capital markets. Our conversation covers the challenges of building an effective investor brand, why social media can be a powerful tool for IR, her experience in global companies and what US companies can adapt from other markets, and practical advice for integrating the IR and PR functions. Fabienne, throughout the course of doing these podcasts, I have found that the topic of building an audience and brand and telling your story comes up a lot, which is right in your wheelhouse. And so I wanted to start off digging into your view on PR and how it relates to investor relations. And so what are some of the challenges that you've seen during your career when it comes to building an investor brand?
Thank you for having me here. Great question for us to start. I think that looking back to when I started with investor relations, when I was internal in a bank in Brazil, one of the largest banks in Brazil, it was treated as two things completely separate, And I think that it took us a little bit of time to really understand how integrated those things were and how we should be building very strong relationships with the main journalists, like in the good and the bad times, right? I thought that we need to treat the journalists are stakeholders, right? When we are working on the communications, we need to look at journalists as stakeholders, and we need to not only look at them as a way for us to be on the cover of the Wall Street Journal, but also like it's a two-way relationship, right? Sometimes we will have to be sources and give information, and this doesn't need to become an article, but we need to be there for them, and they will be there for us in other important moments. So I think that this is an important first takeaway for that. Like look at this, at building these relationships as an important tool for investor relations officers, right? Doesn't need to be only the CFO and the CEO. Like you can build your relationships with the journalists as well.
Right. Okay. You just mentioned something that when you and I were chatting on a previous call, sort of working at a big bank in Brazil. You have a history of being a bit of a trailblazer, if you will, in being. It's one of the first women in Brazil who was talking about investments on social media. Why do you think social media is such an important tool for investor relations?
So that's true. So I have to say that I really love social media, and in terms of investor relations, I was one of the first women in Brazil to talk about capital markets, and I loved Twitter. I loved the way the information flew, how we were able to get to know so many people discussing about the same subject at the same time. And this, I'm saying that this happened, I think, more than 10 years ago, because I think I already received something from Twitter saying that this was already 10 years ago. I even remember when I started, I had some I was an entrepreneur and I built some companies in Brazil. And back in 2010, I was trying to help companies deliver a better investment story for retail investors. And this needed to be done through social media. And I found a lot of companies really saying no in a way of like, like retail investors only want to know about dividends. They don't really make a difference in our investor base. And I'm happy to see 12 years from now, from that day, how different it is, right? We were discussing this at the NIRI conference back in Boston in June, that for some companies, the retail investors make up almost 40% of their investor bases. So there's no other way to communicate with these investors than on social media, right? It's now not only Twitter. There are so many other platforms. I heard from a company that is doing investor days inside Reddit, so that they can reach out to the ones that discuss shares on Reddit. But so many interesting platforms available today, and I am a huge fan of how this information gets available to investors. And I feel that companies need to be more and more connected to understand the discussions that are happening about their stock, whether they like it or not. So I feel it's a challenge for investor relations, but there's no way to be out of it.
Is that a common, if I would call it an objection, that you hear from investor relations teams or maybe management teams at some of the companies that you work with, that they don't want to invest in social media because they view it as a retail focused strategy?
Yes, I think most of them relate to social media in terms of being connected to their strategies with retail investors.
Okay.
And in this sense, I have to say, I always tell them when they tell me that I tend to agree that the institutional investors engage much less on social media than retail investors, but they are there because they are checking the buzz, right? Because institutional investors have all the tools to check the buzz wherever it is, and social media is great for them. So we know that they have all the tools to get to understand what's been said about these companies in all these platforms. So I try to make these companies that have this feeling to understand that even though it's more, you will get more engagement from retail investors in social media. Yes, all the institutional investors are keeping up and listening to the buzz.
So it seems to me like there's kind of two parts, two major benefits to leveraging social specifically, which is only one part of the PR strategy. But it seems to me like one is that listening component of what are people saying about us, what is their perception, and being able to see that in real time and respond to it as well. But the other side, it seems to be more on the just communication, right, of getting the message out and building a narrative. Any tips, though, for somebody who's just starting out? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people who listen to this and don't necessarily have a social media strategy from an IR perspective. What are some of the steps that people should take?
Right. So I think that the most successful companies that I saw do very effective programs on social media are the ones that really integrate. So the investor relations teams integrates with the communications team, because normally the investor relations team is a small one, and it's sometimes very hard for them to keep up with everything that is going on social media. And at the same time, the communications area, the investor relations is not top of their minds in terms of when they are preparing the messages. They don't really have the investors as one of the stakeholders that would be receiving the message. Yeah. So I think that my take is like, be a partner of the communications team. Have the communications team super engaged in everything that you do as investor relations. Like, treat them as a real partner in everything, because that's the best way for them to understand that everything that they produce will also be seen by investors. Even when they are when the social media team is preparing something that is focused on clients, right? Normal clients or prospects, etc. They really need to know the kind of impact that this would have on investors that are looking at these messages. And so having them understand, like train them and engage them to understand that, I think it's really important. And I would say it's a great way for the investor relations team to increase the outreach, right? Because they will have the communications team helping them put messages out.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay. And kind of going back to some of your experience in Brazil, and I know now you put a fair amount of time into helping sort of international companies who are looking to build a presence in North America. Obviously, that's a challenging thing if there's not much awareness and coming into a new market where maybe you're not very well known. So what are some of the challenges that you see for those international companies that are trying to get into say, the US or North America in general?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark. And I have to say that I'm really enjoying having this opportunity to be able to serve clients from Asia, from Israel, from India, European, and see that part of the challenges that we had in Brazil and other Latin American countries are exactly the same. So it's not really very different. Of course, there are specifics on each country and each region, but in general, a lot of the questions are the same. And that's why we have been integrating more of the PR into the IR programs. That's, I think, one of the most important differentials that we offer right now, because I feel that the IR teams, sometimes they feel that only putting out a wire with their press releases is enough for the markets to be aware. And now that I'm living here for almost 4 years, and I understand very well how the news come to us in our devices, in our especially on our iPhones, like I use an iPhone, but to our phones and to our screens and even to the TV, is a completely different way. So in terms of PR here, like, of course, the journalists are receiving the press releases and sometimes they react directly on it, but you need to do much more. You need to be much more proactive to really get attention. Like the journalists right now, they're similar to the sell-side analysts, right? They cover a huge number of companies. And most of the time, the journalists that are here in US, and I'm talking specifically about American journalists, right? Not the ones that are representing foreign outlets. The ones that are here, they sometimes really need to have the angle that makes sense for their American readers. And that's how we try to help, right? Because a company that is only writing a press release, translating it from their language to English and then putting it out on the wire, sometimes don't really get what would take for a journalist to really pick it up and maybe interview the CEO, maybe interview the CFO and turn it into a story. This has been challenging. It's just as challenging as getting coverage from a news side, but it pays off, right? Because once the journalists really understand and establishes a relationship, that's when your company starts to show up more in the platforms, in the news cycles, and hopefully we'll get more interviews from top management.
Do you think that is so different from maybe small or mid-cap companies in North America? Do you think it's harder for an international company coming in? Yeah.
To be honest, I think it's harder. Of course, not for like when we're talking about the largest companies on each country, is not as much. But for example, for a Brazilian company, a small cap company in Brazil is a micro company here. So it's really hard for them to get the attention, and it's hard because sometimes it's not even easy for the journalists as well as the analysts to find the peers, to correlate them to who they already know that does that. So I really think that it's more challenging. I sometimes I saw, for example, I learned by watching these programs that, for example, TV programs, it's very hard to see foreign companies being interviewed on CNBC, for example. I only see American companies being interviewed there. I don't know if that's a policy, but I see as like it's an American show for the American people about the American companies, right?
Right.
So we need to explain to our clients, right? Like it will be very hard for you to get CNBC. Let's try other outlets that would be interested in getting it into there. But I find it really more challenging for foreign companies.
So you have a few different, when you think about the PR tool set, you've got the journalists, you've got press releases, you've got social media. Are there other tools or channels that you're leveraging that you found to be successful for companies who are looking to build that brand?
No, I don't think that there are other channels, but I think that what we are trying to explore is the creativity in using these channels. I think that it's for everybody, the challenge right now is time and attention, right? So how do we stand out in the crowd on the platforms that these people are? So, for example, normally the main tool for you to reach out to journalists and investors is email, right? But I'm finding out that it's very interesting to see how I normally receive more feedback and quicker answers from journalists if I reach out to them on Twitter. And now with all this discussion on Twitter, let's see what will be the if
that will remain.
And there are other platforms. They appear like, I don't know, every month there's a new platform, and everybody who works with communications engage with these new platforms very quickly to get to know if this is an important one. But for me, it's very interesting to see, like, I really get more engagement on Twitter. We see, even when we send email, some journalists are very smart. I think they put an automatic answer telling us, like, try to reach out here, because it will be quicker than by email. And also in terms of formats, we have been seeing more and more of video being used. So I am not such a high user of YouTube, but I know that YouTube is an important platform, and it is when we are talking to our clients, it's something that it's always on our list, so that they think of YouTube, right? Some companies are bringing their conference calls to YouTube, investor days on YouTube. Sometimes they just post it after it, or sometimes they really do it live on the platform. We understand that doing live on the platform on YouTube in an open space is hard. So we normally prefer to put it out afterwards. But I know that some companies that tried and succeeded in doing it live. So.
Okay, great. And one of the things I feel is a challenge is actually funny. This is a good opportunity where I can speak about this from my own perspective a little bit, which is in the early days of Irwin, we recognized that there was a big brand building effort. And part of what we needed to do was get out there and get the news outlets and everything. And so we started thinking about PR, and fortunately I had a friend of mine who now works with us and was in PR, but it was always hard to figure out the ROI. That was always a piece that we struggled with.
Yes.
And I imagine that that's a question that you get fairly regularly from your clients as well. And so how do you think about, or how do your clients think about the ROI and sort of measuring that ROI of PR and IR together?
Right. Well, that's a great question. In terms of PR, most of the clients like to have that calculation of how much the article that was printed would have costed if it was paid advertising, right?
Yeah.
So when we do this calculation, of course, we get to big numbers. So the ROI is good. But I think it also comes with, I would say, like comparing having it versus not having it, and the cost of not being there.
Yeah.
Whereas your competitor is, because that's sometimes the complaint that we get, right? Oh, but why my competitor is here, and there, and
right.
here. And we need to sometimes explain, like, well, but your competitor released 5 press releases and you didn't have as much news. We need to produce news so that we get on the news all the time.
Yeah.
And then we get. So, but I agree with you. Like, I don't have any experience to share with you in terms of a client that would question the effectiveness of the program by only calculating the ROI. Mm-hmm. I think that we try to give them not only this calculation of the presence in how much would the presence cost, but also, for example, when you send a press release, there is an outreach, like your name is out, like there, and how did it help getting picked up by the specialized media and eventually starting new relationships with other outlets that got their voice out. But I agree with you, like it's not pure math to get to the ROI.
I think so. Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think we came to that realization too, of it's part of it is a little bit measurable in terms of, I don't know, you can look at traffic metrics and viewership and things. Part of it is also just soft. It's, you know that you should do it. You know that you have to do it to some degree. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. It takes some time.
And just to add that our program for the foreign companies, it's not only, it's about taking them a lot of opportunities that are available in this communications market that they wouldn't be aware if it wasn't for us, right? Because we are here, we are connected to all these outlets. These outlets, I think it's great how a lot of the smaller outlets work with events, with awards, with a lot of very important ways for brands to build their investor brand. And this is something that we also take to our clients as well. And that they, of course, would they be able to do it without us? They would, but it would, like, we have it in a very organized way and makes it to make their lives easier, especially for the investor relations areas that are so small and really don't have the bandwidth to go after all these opportunities.
Right. Yeah. On that note, one of the things that's kind of interesting I find about IR is, regardless of how small the company is, by way of being a public company and doing these doing investor relations, doing earnings calls and AGMs and everything, you are always creating content. And so there does seem to be this steady stream of content being created. To your point, whether it's a press release or an investor deck or whatever it is. A lot of the time, though, to your point, it's like you do a press release or you post it on your IR website, and that's it. And so what are some of the ways, we've talked about a few of them, but what are some of the ways that you're seeing IROs leverage that content and create sort of interesting formats to repurpose those materials?
Yeah, I have been seeing like a lot of creativity among investor relations, and I find it really, really cool that they do that. I think that what I have been seeing is like that. First of all, they would think of other ways than the normal regulatory moments to reach out to investors, right? So having a monthly newsletter that organizes all the releases that you put out, because again, you think that when you put it out, and sometimes it's even only on your website, right? Didn't even become a press release. Right. Somebody on the other side received and read it, right? But that's not true. So why don't gather all of that and do it on a monthly basis, just like with the links and everything? And it's an opportunity for you to write 2 or 3 paragraphs about what was going on that month on an additional note, because I feel that some companies really sometimes do the minimum and only on the quarterly earnings, and it's very important to be out and reaching out more. So it's a way for you to get information out. I think that doing these newsletters is a way to do that. Another thing that we have been talking to a lot of companies about is, of course, there's all this discussion on ESG, and some of the companies are still only looking at ESG as I need to produce a sustainability report once a year. And then they complain that sometimes when the rating company releases the rating, it's 1 year with information that is late. And but you didn't update it anywhere, right? So if you didn't update, how would they know? So we are also incentivizing them to think of the ESG content as a content that needs to be updated, not only on a quarterly basis on the earnings releases, but more than that. And prepare an ESG website that is just as interactive as the investor relations, so that people can sign up to receive updates. And you create a newsletter or a blog post or something where you keep sending this news out. What I think we have been discussing AI, right? We know that more and more a lot of content that is published, be there rating reports or news that are published outside, are just robots that come into your website, right, get the content and put it out somewhere, or robots that get your press release and put it out, right? So if you don't think of everything that you're putting out available to the robots as well, your message will be limited. Yeah. And I think it's important for IRs to also realize.
So it's sort of your point, thinking about how do you really distribute these things on a more regular basis? And I assume through a variety of different channels, right? And testing different channels and seeing what works.
Yes.
But I also feel like, to your point, a lot of people, though, they put the press release and then they send out an email. But I don't know, people are always talking about how investors get thousands of emails a day. It's hard to keep track of them all, right?
Yes, but at the same time, for example, you would want to make sure that the important people, the key investors that you want to receive your message, I know it will sound super basic, but I heard it from companies, right? You need to be sure that they are in your mailing list, for example.
Right.
And sometimes they're not. I have asked companies in the past, okay, so your top 20 investors are in your list, and they didn't really know. And when they went out to look, they realized that they weren't.
Right.
So
that's all this missed opportunity.
Yeah, and of course, having a great CRM for me is number one, right? You can't rely only on the people who go to your website to receive your information. You really must be proactive in the sense of making sure everyone that you want to receive your message is basically on the mailing list.
Yeah, I think we're big advocates at Irwin of active investor relations, and it sounds like you are too. And I think adding PR to that is just like another step in that direction of being very active and being very vocal and making sure that everybody's getting the message. I'm still surprised about the number of companies that we'll speak to and say the results will speak for themselves. Investors will find us, right? And unfortunately, the market isn't that perfect. It's very imperfect, right? So as you know, you have to be out there, you have to be proactive. And so sort of to wrap all this together, you've dropped some really great tips throughout this podcast. So let's say I'm an IRO or member of the management team who's sitting there going, oh man, all I'm doing is sending out press releases. Got to think about PR. What would you say are some of the first steps? Like if you were just to say, hey, you're just getting started, here are a few things to think about. What would that be?
Let me see. First of all, I would say, let's start building the relationships, right? Let's see, if there are already relationships built, and if they are not, let's start building the relationships. I would tell them that they need to go out and start telling their story in a way that gets the media outlets interested. And again, we spoke that before, we are not saying that this is easy and this is going to be quick, because I feel that sometimes that's what frustrates companies, right? That they think that in 6 months they will already be all over the covers, right? And for a company that is smaller, and that has not been out so much, it will take 6 months for the first article to go out, right? And I think that so first of all, strategize on what you want. So what are your goals, your middle to long-term goals in terms of building the brand, the investor brand, and let's get out. Let's start reaching out and talking to this. And of course, when we are thinking about the strategy here in US, we will need to work with press releases. There's no other way to do it. Mm-hmm. But let's start looking at the press releases in a different way. Let's get them more engaging. Let's get them more frequent. Because that's I think I think that's what I would say. Are you ready to commit to a frequency of releasing press releases in a way that we will be able to gather more attention? Because that's something that we tell our clients in the beginning. We will need to create content, right? That's how it's done. And sometimes when we engage, we realize that it was harder to produce the content than we thought. Right. So I think that it's important for management to really get the team engaged because the content is there. If the company is public, there is new things to be.
A lot going on.
There's a lot going on. Exactly. We just need to find the correct sources who will be giving us that content so that it can become a press release or can become an interview, can become something that we will offer a specific journalist so that we build the relationship. So I think I will stress more this thing about being ready to create content.
So a few things I took away from this as well, tips that you put out there. One was, I thought it was a really good one, is thinking about the journalists as stakeholders and building that long-term relationship. To your point, it's going to take 6 months or more to get that first article, but you need to invest in the relationship. Talked about how social media channels, there is a lot of retail on there, but there are also a lot of institutional investors who are listening and watching. You talked about the integration of IR and PR. So I feel like if you're just starting, that's another thing of getting IR and PR in the room and saying, hey, what are the things happening in the company that could be a story? So I think lots of great actionable tips. So Fabienne, I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much. And hopefully we can do this again soon.
No, thank you very much, Mark, for having me. And it was a pleasure to participate in this podcast. Wish you a lot of success.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Winning IR. For more winning ideas, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Irwin, a better way to manage investor relations. For more information, visit www.getirwin.com.